Welcome to the Memories of a Moonbird podcast, exploring life one story at a time. Hello, friends, and welcome to the Memories of a Moonbird podcast. I'm Daniel Sherrill. Today on the show, for more than 25 years, he's been a critic and reporter at newspapers, including the Washington Post, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Detroit News, and USA Today. He's also been a frequent contributor for networks including G4 and CNN. He's interviewed some of the most famous and successful people in the world, some of which are considered Hollywood royalty. He was born in Charleston, South Carolina, the son of a newspaper veteran and first-grade school teacher. He moved to Detroit in the first grade and stayed there all the way through college, where he graduated with a bachelor's degree in Russian history from the University of Michigan. Today, in addition to being the internship coordinator for UCLA's Journalism Extension Department, he's currently the film and television critic for ScreenPix.com and the editor of HollywoodBowls.com. It's an understatement to say that he's a wizard with words, wit, and writing. In 2000, in an effort to treat his juvenile diabetes, he became the recipient of a dual kidney and pancreas transplant, the side effects of which can be as terrible as the disease itself. It was an experience that changed his life forever, and he wrote about it in his book, The Needle and the Damage Done. Living with the transplant meant drastic life changes, including 2 post-transplant illnesses, cyclic vomiting syndrome and atrial fibrillation, the combination of which has substantially limited his ability to travel. Thankfully, here to talk about it and so much more, please welcome journalist Scott Bowles. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me.
I appreciate you being here. So let's jump right in. We're going to get to all kinds of interesting stuff, but I'm curious, what were you like as a kid?
You know, that was hard to tell because I was always in my father's shadow. It seemed like my entire childhood was defined for me without ever being told it was being defined. I was always left to go with Dad on assignment, and Mom would later call it getting the lead in your blood. And I finally realized what that meant, where by 7th grade, I remember telling my career counselor, I'm going to be a reporter. I knew the high school paper I was going to be a reporter for. Sort of frightening to have your future laid out, even in your mind, that way.
How old were you at this time?
7th grade.
Wow.
And to this day, I've never done anything but write.
Why Russian history?
Dad told me, go to school to learn what you want to learn. And at the time, as old as I am, the Cold War was going on. It was fresh enough in the memory of society. I just wanted to hear the Russian side of it. I would have professors who were Russian claim that Khrushchev was misquoted at the UN. It was the greatest education I could have gotten. And I just did radio and newspaper at the college in my off time. I treated that as my social life. I hated frat life, was no partier, so holding away with my news pad and a microphone was a perfect way to spend the extra hours.
Do you think that you actually fell in love with writing? Or I know you talked about your dad kind of thrusting it upon you, but is it something that you truly believe you fell in love with or you were told to do?
That's the chicken and egg question. How do you know when you convince yourself you're happy? And when do you know you're really happy? And what's the difference? I really believe it's what my mother said, that I was given these sort of tidbits of Dad as a reporter. And Dad used to speak, I don't know if your father did this about his career, but he used to say the greatest thing about reporting is that you can tell anybody in the world to screw off. And it's true. It's not as true now that corporations have become a part of that. But I got to see the freedom that he got to have on the job. He would go talk to people and occasionally get in arguments, always get into dialogue, and then go back and write about it. And for Christ's sake, he got paid for that. And the notion of having that freedom of being able to tell authorities, screw you, I'm going to write this, I don't believe you, I believe this is true. It's amazing to give someone our age, as we're in our preteen years, that view of autonomy, that you can be what you want, and that your future is guided by you. And in a weird way, he never said a word, but he let me see. And think about the number of careers that are out there. How many do you think you could get? I think you're in one of those rare fields. I know I am. Where if you have the ability, they don't care where you got it from. If you're a good writer and they can see it on the paper, that's proof enough.
Yeah, if
The
you're a good
degree-
actor, they don't care how you were trained. If
That's
you're,
right.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they know that you're going for something that's almost, it's not tangential. It can't be touched. In the same way the Supreme Court would rule, I can't tell you what pornography is, but I know it when I see it. Well, that's kind of the truth of our career. If you show that you're naturally curious, if you show that when you go out and you really want to know what your partner is saying, what the guy at the party is telling you he does, and you can find that interesting and you can glean something from that life, well, you're a reporter. The beauty of reporting is all of us do it every day in our lives. We go home at the end of a day and we sit at the table and we explain what happened in our day. Well, that is straight news reporting. That is choosing the lead story and telling it in the natural news story. The way we talk naturally is the way we communicate through journalism.
So do you think that when let's say a couple's relationship breaks apart, and most of the time I think it's a communication breakdown, essentially what you're saying is, not to put words in your mouth, but you're saying that if a relationship breaks down, then the communication breaks down. Essentially, they're not interested in each other's news anymore.
Well, think about what ultimately, if we think about what drives them apart, if you're a reporter and you're listening to both sides, you would say there's a real communication gap. If you were to ask either one of them, it's because one of them leaves a towel on the floor when they go to change. That we get so wrapped up in the microscopic, we can no longer see that larger picture. And one of the beauties, I think, of film and of writing story and of journalism is that it forces you to take that full yard step back, because you have to tell the story. You can't involve yourself with the details too much of that story, that you need to recount for someone else what happened in a clear and concise way. That's what human history is. I mean, if it wasn't some guy telling another guy, it turns out this spear downs a zebra pretty well. Well, that's how society moves, that good journalism was essentially good citizenry.
And this speaks to something that I've often told people, which is every single thing you believe to be true is because someone else told you it was true. And people try to fight me on this, but it's like, no, even the scientific things, if someone says to you, this dish is healthy for you because it contains these 5 things and it does this to your blood pressure, and you choose to believe it. You didn't go into a lab and actually run those tests. You're trusting someone else's knowledge.
That's right.
And I'm not saying you shouldn't trust it. I mean, in general, we should trust our knowledge, especially science, Before we get too far off course, though, I wanted to ask you, as far as traveling goes, did you travel with your family when you were growing up, besides going out with Dad and doing stuff?
Now, that was the good argument for not to get into that field. That Dad was the type that would work 36 hours straight on a story and would stay at the paper overnight. But Mom was very much an independent woman. So every summer, we would get in the car and drive to the Deep South, where we were from originally before we moved to Detroit, to show us where we were from. And Mom was of that school that while she was Southern, she was very forceful and decided, if your father's going to work on it, we're still going to take that vacation. So we would pile into a VW Bug and drive down to Charleston, down to Atlanta, where my family was from. And I've come to realize that these things that were travel, I didn't really see as travel, but they were the greatest experiences, and that is the secret to travel. That if you measured me by the lateral miles I moved, there wouldn't be that many. I've certainly parachuted into someplace in a reporting capability, Jeff Dahmer's apartment in Milwaukee and Columbine and all of that. So there have been places we can talk to, but I realized actually on this last staycation that we are all going for the same place. Every place we go, we are headed for the same direction. And that place is where memories are etched, where you are having what I call a heaven now moment. That if you're doing something and somebody were to ask you, if I were to recreate an afterlife that you could make better than this, what would it be? And you have trouble answering that question. Well, you're in the middle of the heaven now moment. We talk about the halcyon days. Well, this is the halcyon day. That is the halcyon day. Where we're all going is to that place where we hope we'll remember it forever, where we hope that we will come upon that wet cement and make that mark. It might be something that we've seen during travel, but it might not be. It might be an epiphany that we had during a staycation. It might be a realization we had when all we had to look at was ourselves, when you had nothing but introspect as a view. But we're all headed for that same place, something that we are going to recall. That I remember you had recently gone to Australia. Well, the only thing that makes that something to you is that you were of the mindset, I'm going to collect memories here. You were of the right mindset. And we get that way with travel. For some reason, we prep our brains. We're going to see something new. We're going to experience something new, so we consume it new. When the truth is, we consume things new everywhere we are. I realized that perhaps it was because I was doing stories, perhaps because I'm such a boring guy, I look for something interesting, but that if you really look for what is different about this moment, you'll find something. You'll find somebody acting a little bit different, or a little more comfortable, or revealing a little more, something almost infinitesimal. But if your brain is primed for that, the way we are for travel, I'm going to a new country. I'm going to have my eyes open. The camera and my brain are going to capture.
You're saying
so
do this
much
in your
of
everyday
this.
life.
That's right. And you can't do it every day. Nobody can be expected to. But just having that as a practice, that, I'm going to look at what happened and really weigh whether anything's new. It may not be. It may be like every other day, but it's surprising when you put even a modicum of thought behind it, how much is actually revealed.
Well, what do you like most about traveling?
The imagination of what it must be like to be in those moccasins. For instance, on a story, it was the Jeffrey Dahmer story, and I was diabetic at the time, and I was flying there, the deadline was popping, and I began to have an insulin reaction. It happens when your blood sugar gets too low. It happens commonly with diabetics. And so I just sat on the patio. I couldn't do anything. The press is going crazy. I walk around back, just sit. My sugar has to get normal. And a woman comes up and asks if I'm okay. I tell her I'm diabetic. She's diabetic. She leads me up and just shares her life. Well, that's travel in a way that it wasn't even intended. The intention was to get a byline out of Milwaukee so we could say we were there. But what happened was, for about 30 minutes, this woman opened her life to living across the hall, living with this smell. So empirically, it became a good story because it revealed something new. But in terms of the heart of travel, in my mind, travel is almost pearls before swine if you're not interacting with the people who are there.
Yeah, my father always said it's to commune in the humanness of other human beings.
Exactly. And there's a universal element to all of it that you can find, but you find that people are the same. They move in the same small neighborhoods, in the same small circles that they always did, but the reality is just a little bit different. When I was in Atlanta, I had been working on Iron Man, the big movie for the paper. and began talking to my uncle and was telling him about it. And he said, "Is that a new movie?" That's one of those moments where you have to stop and think, wow, if you're out of LA, what you're doing is really not that important. The world really does revolve around little silos that you'd be best suited to learn a little bit about.
Yeah, I mean, there's all these people around the world that do things every day. Mike Rowe tried to do this with Dirty Jobs to show, it's a great show, to show that there are incredible people doing stuff every day that you don't have no idea what happens. I worked night shift at a gas station when I was in high school, the Sohio gas station in Solon, Ohio. When you work 10 at night till 7 in the morning, you see a whole different side to the planet.
Yeah.
And these truck drivers would come in and they would bring a giant 32 or 64 ounce thermos, and all they wanted was some coffee for the road because they have a long haul ahead of them, right? And the owner was this kind of jerk, and he said, make sure you charge them for if it's 64 ounces, you charge them for a pot of coffee. And these guys would come in and I'd fill them up full to the brim and just go, yeah, man, it's 40 cents. And I'm not going to, these guys are hauling around all the shit that makes our lives happen. And I'm not going to charge them $3 for coffee to keep them alive. That's the Robin Hood in me. But well, hey, let's talk a little bit about the transplant and the diabetes stuff since you brought it up. You had a transplant, a dual transplant. Was it controversial to do the procedure?
So at the time, I guess it might have been controversial. I was a police reporter for the Washington Post. And the funny thing about the Post is that it is so cutthroat. And in a way, it's as cruel as the disease I had had. I had had diabetes and truthfully was dying to it. And so I was doing stories about the worst that the city committed every day. You had to go into the morning and pick up the reports that would let you know all of the murders, all of the rapes, all of the aggravated assaults, and you'd have to go through and choose the goriest one and write about it.
Ugh.
Then you'd have to travel to that neighborhood, ask what happened, and you'd get another horror story. So you come back and write that story. And the whole time, my health is fading. My diabetes is getting worse. I'm a terrible diabetic. I work at night, do not watch sugar the way I should. And with that schedule, it's really hard to. And so it literally feels like everything is dying, that the city is dying. My beat is about the dying. I'm dying. And I'm being overly macabre here, but that's the sense. So I finally tell the paper during a shootout of all things. So I call the editor and I'm thinking, I'm gone. I'm making a life change. Life is just too negative. So I call it in. And then by the time I get back, I have finished in my mind the cover letter I'm going to send to USA Today. It's a glitzy, colorful joke of a paper compared to the Post. But I kind of decide I'm going to stop focusing on death. And a few days later, my eye vision doubles. Don't know why. Everything that I look at, there are two of after I've made this call. So I begin to do some research. And I look up the eye, and I look up what could cause it. And it's a long story. The short of it is through the course of it, I discovered this thing called pancreas transplants. My doctor had never said a thing, but I began to read and discover in the Mayo Clinic that they have begun to do pancreas transplants. And if they're successful, you're no longer diabetic. And suddenly all of the eye problems I'm having, all of the problems with diabetes, if the transplant works, it's going to be successful. So I fly to the Mayo Clinic and just on my own decide I'm going to enter the wait for these two organs. Now, they say it's experimental. It really doesn't begin until 2008, and it's 2000. So even they say we're flying by the seat of our pants. We think we know what's required, but you need to know that you'll be interviewed a lot, that this is somewhat experimental. About a year and a half pass, and my cadaver match just shows up. I'm in New York doing a story about how cab drivers are getting shot during the story, get the call your organs are in. You have 24 hours to get to Minnesota.
Wow.
So what you do, if you're on the list, is you call everybody you know. You call whatever airline is up at that hour. Doesn't matter the cost, because the clock is now ticking. And they tell you the organ is cooling in a cooler, and in about a day it goes bad. And so literally hopped a flight that morning, flew to Minnesota, and then they began the transplant. And before they did, I remember asking, do you think this is worth it? Because there's a moment, particularly when it comes to the kidney and transplant and surgery, where you ask yourself, am I good right now? And you do have to kind of assess, how good's my life?
Yeah.
How bad has it gotten? Am I as sick as I thought I was when I asked for the transplant? Or was I so desperate I made that call in haste? And you really do have this moment where things freeze, and you suddenly have to decide, well, what is motivating you? Was it fear initially and reason now? Or is fear now taking over the reason previous that you were involved in this? In a way, it's just a coin toss.
Well, what was it for you? Which one? Do you know?
That's a great question. It was simply Julie asking me, my ex-wife at the time, saying, you've prepared nine months. If I don't do it now, then when am I going to do it? Which is kind of a question we all ask.
Yeah.
Whether it's a project
Well, that's
we're going
Hillel,
to
if
start.
not now, when, you know?
Exactly. And it was a 15-hour surgery. I've seen photos, remember nothing. But by the time I woke up, suddenly it was a new life. I mean, I could eat. They were serving me a dessert that 12 hours before would have sent me to the hospital. And now they were serving it to me for dessert. And that was the hardest thing, to engage in a behavior that is not adult in any way, but to suddenly realize, well, now I can have anything. Now I can choose anything on the menu. That's what they don't teach you about the transplant, is what's going to change in your mental world.
So you had this transplant, and then how long after it did you start experiencing complications?
About 3 years.
3 years. So for 3 years, you thought, this is awesome.
For 3 years, I was Pinocchio, the real boy. Traveled, went to Australia, did all of those things. Again, the thing that they don't tell you is that what you substitute for insulin, which does not cause any illness except high or low blood sugar, is that what you have to take after a transplant are meds so that your body doesn't
Reject
you need immunosuppressants. And those drugs are nasty. I mean, they taste like pills that have been soaking in a dirty sock that's been soaking in vinegar. It is so bitter. And I've learned to take about a dozen at a time. For a while, you take one, soon you learn two. After a while, you learn how to loosen your throat. I could probably win a drinking game about how many pills you could swallow at once. And you have no idea, but over time, you begin to get nauseated. First, it's a little upset. Then you notice some changes, like when you sleep at night, you get a little sicker. Well, what happens is you're level and your body is resting horizontally, and the meds are just settling and concentrating in your stomach. So every morning...
How often do you have to take these meds?
For the rest of your life.
No, I mean, throughout the day. Is it like once a day or?
Twice a day, and then right before bed. So 3 times a day. Not as many right before you go to bed. But the effect is everything has been silted in your gut. So when you wake up with kind of an acidic reflux. I don't want to... Hope nobody's eating right now, but you just don't wake up with an appetite. Yeah. And little things will set you off. I've eaten with you, where if I eat a little something that's just a little bit wrong, well, then my stomach just shuts down. But, I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Well, that was going to be my question. If you could go back in time, you would still have the surgery?
I would be on the waiting list tomorrow if I rejected today.
Do you think if you hadn't had the surgery, you'd still be alive?
No. The thing about diabetes, and the thing that's toughest about it, is that particularly if you're a juvenile diabetic, which I was, type 1, the diabetes looms over your shoulder no matter what you do. No matter what you eat, you wonder, will this throw my sugar off? If you exercise, you wonder, will this hike leave me hypoglycemic? That what you never escape with diabetes is the mental cost of bearing it. Whereas with the transplant, you actually do forget. If I've taken my morning meds and the nausea passes, by about noon, you become aware that you're feeling good. And that's to me, the important state to get to.
Do you get terrible heartburn from this?
Yeah, very much. But the beauty of having it, and even the transplant, is those quiet moments when you realize you're not sick, when you realize you're well. And well is a relative term. But one of the epiphanies that's come from all of this is to have that moment, often in the afternoon when health really kicks in. I don't feel any illness. My stomach's not sick. There is no reflux. Well, that's a heaven now moment. That's a halcyon day. And that's why I say I don't know if teaching prepared me, or travel prepared me, or career prepared me, or sickness did. Maybe all of them. But I feel like I have at least begun to grasp strangling the moment. That's what I call it. Where you're in the middle of the afternoon. Time is just clicking by. Well, that's the heaven moment. That strangled moment is heaven, because there will come a time when you think back to that moment where all you thought about was the clock ticking, or you were bored, and you'll realize what an underrated emotion and value boredom is.
I was going to ask you, so how is it for you when you see people in the world that really have no perspective or small perspective on time? After my father passed away, it really changed how I valued my everyday. And I realized, wow, there's only, not that I didn't know previously, because I think I did, but you really do come to grips with the fact that, I guess I said to Jolene, I saw the end of the movie. I firsthand was there when he died, and I see how it ends for all of us. And so knowing what's really actually waiting for us and how most of us die changed now how I live. And so you have to have had some kind of experience with this, facing down. I mean, you could have died several times, and you still have to deal with all these complications from the surgery. That, I think, gives a human being a perspective of value of time.
Well, let me ask you, what did you find you changed when you saw the end of the movie?
A lot of things. The first of which I think is that I don't suffer people who waste my time anymore. That was there were some people in my life who did, and on a regular basis I let them do it, and then I very quickly put that to a close. And then with myself, I actually had to look at myself and go, how are you managing the time you have left on earth? What are you involved in? What are the things you enjoy? And I tell people, one of the greatest exercises I think a human being can do is to sit down, pen and paper, not with a keyboard, not with a computer, not with an iPad, pen and paper, and write down every single thing you loved to do when you were 12 years old. And if you're not doing some of those things today, you're living life incorrectly, in my opinion. That. Yeah. And so I did. I wrote down. I was like, well, I like to play with Legos. I like to build models. I like to, and I wrote down all this stuff, and no joke, there was not one single thing on that list that I was doing as an adult.
Is that right?
Yeah, including reading. Reading is one of my great passions. I was so busy working, I didn't make time for reading. So I just said, okay, this is nonsense. I have to start doing some of these things. And so I did. I handpicked a few. I was like, well, I'm going to dedicate myself to read, at least 20 minutes a day, every day from now on, Wow. I went to the hobby store and actually bought a little model that I've always wanted to build. And I started doing that. I, primed it and got the pieces cut. And so eventually so it's a Christmas project, a winter project, when things slow down. Yeah. But I just started doing some of these things that made me happy as a kid. And of course, no spoiler needed, I became a much happier person, and life became a lot simpler. So,
Wow.
yeah. Speaking of childhood, do you have a favorite childhood book?
I was a huge fan as a child of Encyclopedia Brown. I don't know if you read that at all, but every one, I think it was the reporter in me, every one would have a mystery, and it would be a logical question, and if you could solve it, you would win it. I was a huge Encyclopedia Brown fan.
That's cool. Now, is this a 70s thing?
It was. It is frightening to think of what we saw in the 70s, and I wouldn't change it for anything. But in a way, I feel blessed to have been born then. I don't know if you feel this way.
I do, yeah.
And this is the reason. I don't know about you, but when summer came around, we did nothing. My parents worked. I was not in any summer camps. And I realized, though they had not meant to, they had taught me a great lesson. And that was, how do you kill hours? Have you ever seen a millennium without a phone? They will appear naked.
Yeah.
And to be able to sit and people watch and to accept, yeah, I'm here early. I've got hours to kill. I've been with people who truly seemed somewhat panicked that they had time to kill. And in a way, we both grew up in the Midwest. I don't know. We seem to be more at ease with a quiet moment.
Yeah. I told somebody once, I have had more fun in my own imagination than I have in many other places I've actually been.
Yes.
And I think that is something that I do worry about today's generation in that they're not taking enough time. Now, I will give them credit and say some of the things they're doing are incredibly imaginative and they're very cool, and I enjoy taking part in those things as well. But I do understand exactly what you're saying, and I kind of miss those days sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and think about the skills that we refer to now that we used to have and are probably worse in our case. But for instance, memory. When we were children, we needed better memories because we didn't have cell phones with numbers programmed on them.
But you had to remember everyone's phone number.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And addresses, reading maps. And the things that we will be able to say we remember when there was no cable TV, when phones were corded, when numbers had to be written down on something.
You had to get up to change the channel on the TV.
That's right. People won't believe it. And it actually makes me wonder, what will they remember when they're older?
Yeah, I think about that too.
What will they think? Back in the day, we only had a 264 terabyte computer.
Well, I think someday it's very possible that someone's going to go, what did they do before they had a microchip implanted in their head that just did all this stuff for them? That they had the heads-up display appear right in front of them and they didn't, I often on the podcast talk about how much I wish we invented the transporter. And so hopefully at some point they'll be like, oh my God, can you imagine what it was like to have to sit in a plane? How much has travel been a part of your career?
It's actually been a good bit. It's only when I became, of all things, a movie critic that it ended. I was once known as a parachute reporter, which meant if there were breaking news, a tornado, a shooting, I had to parachute into a neighborhood. So if there was...
Not literally,
but literally whatever plane we could get, whether it was a charter, an airline, whatever was the closest car, and get there. Yeah. And it was really an exciting time.
Have you ever actually done a parachute jump out of a plane?
Never have. Oh. And I don't know that I would want to.
I have. I went skydiving.
Was it truly the charge? Did you have someone behind you?
I did. I went tandem, yeah.
And did it feel free?
Well, I'll tell you, this is kind of funny about it. You train for like an hour and they teach you everything, a couple hours, whatever it was. You get inside this. My experience was I got inside this rickety plane where I thought something was wrong because everything had been stripped out and there was duct tape all over the plane. And I looked at the guy and I said, hey, I'm not trying to be rude, but why is this plane duct taped together? And he laughed. He's like, no, it's not duct taped together. We cover every metal surface that has a nut or a bolt or a screw or anything with duct tape, so nothing will ever snag on a parachute or our backpacks. It's for safety. And I was like, oh, okay. And then this guy who looked like MacGyver's drunken weird cousin was piloting the plane, and we went up to 10, 12,000 feet. And when they strap you in, there's 4 contact points, 2 on the waist and 2 on the shoulder blades. And then they clip all 4 places in, and then he cinches everything tight. And you're so close to this person that they call it nuts to butts. And you are very familiar with each other at that point. But then the door of the airplane opened, and what they don't tell you is that an absolute massive amount of cold air comes rushing over your body, and because it's cold at 10,000 feet. It's not. It was 90 degrees on the ground when I left. It's freezing cold, and you're like, oh my God. And then you look out the door of the plane. It looks like a model train set from above. And the first thing I thought to myself is, why in the fuck did I agree to do this? This is so stupid. But I was dumb, and I looked at my guide, the guy who was going tandem with me, and before we actually left, I said, hey man, I see these videos where people do acrobatics in the air. Could you flip me around? And he just stopped and smiled and went, sure. And so I was like, uh-oh, what did I just ask for? But sure enough, we went out. If you watch, I have a video. We exit the plane, and he goes whoo, and just flips me onto my back and belly, and then flips me back again. But the whole thing was over in 30 seconds. It's 30 seconds of free fall, and then about 5 minutes under canopy when the parachute goes. And later on, I went hang gliding, and I was up in the air for 30 or 40 minutes with a hang glider, and it was so peaceful and beautiful that I tell people, yeah, it was an adrenaline rush to skydive, but I thoroughly enjoyed hang gliding so much more.
So given both, you would choose skydiving?
I would choose hang gliding.
Hang gliding?
Hang gliding any day of the week, yeah.
Did the the skydiver pull the cord, or did he let you?
He did. So there was me and him tied together, and then there was the videographer skydiving with us, and she's floating in front of me, and I'm waving at the camera. And I was not paying attention because the skydiver connected to me reached his hand around and signaled. And I just forgot in a moment of elation because I'm seeing the earth. You're seeing the curvature of the earth and everything. It's beautiful. I completely forgot that he was going to pull the ripcord. And so suddenly you go from terminal velocity to almost very slow speed. And the harness pulls up on your crotch and everything is like, and it was so unexpected that on the video, I'll have to show you, like, it is a laugh out loud. She captured the whole thing on the video of me, like, basically shitting myself but it was cool. It was a really cool, unique experience. I don't think I would do it again.
I was going to ask you, does it work as a one-time life experience?
For
or did
me,
you get
yes.
the rush? Yeah.
For me, yeah. There are so many other things to do. If Jolene was like, I really want to do this with you, let's do it together, I'd probably actually say no. I'd be like, why don't you go and I'll be on the ground videotaping you coming down. And but I don't think I want to do it again. Huh. Look, I don't know about you, but as I get older, and I'm 48 now, my level of risk, I'm still an adventurer, and I still do crazy stuff, and I rock climb, and I we just did that caving adventure in New Zealand. But I tend to do stuff where there's a little more of a safety element and less chance of dying.
Right. It's funny that once I had to quit the job, I realized that my work became, while I still love to write and hope I do it to the day I die, that my job had only become to see tomorrow. And that's why I say I really don't like when I see somebody sick being called a hero. We have no choice. We either die or we live. It's not a heroic thing. And in a way, it's a beautiful simplicity that my only job is to see how long this umpire clicker can go. That anything I never expected to get over 50, certainly never expected to approach 60, and to have those things become goals that I guess I'm really of the school writ small, of the experience writ small, just explored until there's nothing left with the mind. But I wanted to be able to run, and I wanted to be able to do pull-ups and just become fitter. And now I'm realizing I am so lucky to be who I am and to have lived as long as I have, that I can really take reward from that. And to have a week where I don't get sick, well, that's a really good week. And to be able to recognize it is at least healthy for me. I don't know, certainly wouldn't assume to prescribe it for anybody. But for me, to be able to mark, I'm a real believer in making mountains of molehills.
Yeah.
That life deserves us building it up.
I have a photograph of Jolene from when we were in Paris, and she was sitting at a table, and she's eating this particular chocolate dessert, and she loves chocolate, but there is an expression on her face in this photograph that you know this woman is living purely in bliss of this singular moment.
You captured the moment.
Yeah, of absolute appreciation of life and everything it is in this, dessert moment. And I think that's an inspiration too. That's how we should try to live. It's impossible to human beings.
Exactly.
But to try and live more often with that appreciation of every day.
And on top of that, to be aware when you do and give yourself credit for doing it. The fact that you remember it means you've made it a wet cement moment. That memory is forever etched in your brain. And that's why I mean that travel is really a state of mind, that all memory is a memory of the last memory. It is a Xerox of the most recent copy. So we're simply talking about a different brain input, a different neural input when it comes to travel. What we're really talking about is that imprint on the mind that is never forgotten, and that we need to get primed in the travel state of mind when we're not traveling. And that's the key to a staycation. That's the key to a good day off, where you don't do anything. You Lebowski the day, and you see the beauty in El Dorado there, and that it is beautiful, and that you are living such a blessed first world life.
The other day, I made a really good homemade pizza, one of my favorite things to make. And there was a new sci-fi show on that I was excited to watch. And Jolene was at work, and I was home working. And I made this food. I sat down at the table. I put on this show. And honest to God, I started giggling about how great it was to just have a moment of great food, good TV,
Exactly.
The temperature exactly where I want it.
Think about Caesar.
Julius?
Julius.
Okay.
He would be hard-pressed to be happier than you were in right that moment. That to sit more comfortably with food and drink right before you, a visual feast for your eyes, that, the greats certainly would have hires greater than we know. But I was once sitting in Vegas. It was a penthouse suite in a jacuzzi, and I was thinking, Nero would have trouble matching this, being this elevated, looking over the kingdom. And it's the ability to just recognize it for a moment. It's impossible to make your life mantra, but if you can just pull out those moments every once in a while, you're doing something right. Because look around you, and you will see people lost in the grind. I call it the Nash. They can't see, they can't afford to see, they have kids who need to get picked up. It's the ability to freeze that moment, strangle that time, whether you're on the road or at home. If you strangle the moment, it'll be the same wet cement moment in your life.
Now you say strangle the moment, but it sounds so criminal.
Right.
So we should come up with a better
what should we call it?
Soak up the moment?
Freeze it in amber. Something
Ooh, I like
about
that.
the
Amber
beauty
the moment. That's
of
cool.
that it's worth preserving. That's all it is.
Fossilize the moment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The recognition that this is worth remembering for whatever reason. It deserves a place in your life.
Scott, I'm curious, how do you feel when you're writing?
It's funny. Vonnegut once said that he wasn't athletic, but he could swim. And he wrote, "I'm beautiful in water." And I feel like I'm presentable in words, that I make a good resume, but truly I feel like I can communicate best, and that includes personal things when I'm writing. And I don't know whether it was following Dad as a kid, but you probably get this. You feel a comfort behind the keyboard. And that comfort is actually evident to readers. And if you're not comfortable, they'll sense it.
But do you do that in your personal life? Do you feel like let's say you're having a discussion with a friend and you want to express some things, you're not sure how to talk to them. Would you rather sit down with them in person or write them an email?
I love to talk, but I feel like I talk like I write, which also is probably a little too formal. But I really am a firm believer in communicating clearly, that it is much more effective to have a word that's communicative than is impressive. I like a good vocabulary, but the beauty of simple brevity is hard to explain. And it's something that you appreciate when you're trying to write or when you're reading.
I agree.
It's very hard to do, to have active verbs. And I think it's just a matter of being comfortable with writing the way you speak when you're behind the computer, because people understand when you talk, but people will forget what you're trying to write. So the key is to, whatever the way is you communicate, to write that way as well. It's the best way to show who you are.
So do you try to balance, I would say, quote unquote, taking care of the reader when you're writing and thinking of how you're presenting it to them? Or do you prefer to just stay true to whatever your expression is and write that way? Or a balance of both?
I think that's a great question. I truly do try to give an element that the reader did not know. So much of what I write is about a movie that they are familiar with, or a star they've seen before on TV or in the movies. And so it's important, if I'm doing a profile of someone, to include a fact that they simply didn't know. There was once a profile I had to do of Jack Nicholson. I was thinking, everybody knows about Jack Nicholson. So I asked him, what do you like to watch at TV during the evening on TV? And he says, I love to be home by 9 and watch NCIS. It was so odd to think
cool.
of the greatest actor in American movies wants to catch this silly CBS show, but it's important to him. But it was a fact that people didn't know. And it doesn't need to be an illuminating fact. It might just be a funny fact. Once I did an interview with Sean Penn, and he was eating a steak, and he ordered it so raw, he left blood on the plate, lifted up the plate, and slurped up all the blood. Well, that was something a reader was not going to know and not know about Sean Penn.
Yeah.
So I really believe in the small human things that make him relatable, that they don't know, that then when they recall a story, they would recall that.
How do you like your steak cooked?
Medium plus. I don't like any pink.
If you could tell your younger writing self anything, what would you tell yourself?
Write what you like, because that's going to end up being what you cover. And the same is probably true with everybody who's in a field, that even if it's a field you're not initially crazy about, find the thing within that field that floats your boat, because you'll become good, and they'll see that, and they'll offer you more opportunities. That you can't overestimate the importance of getting into the job itself. But once you're there, I would never take anything for money again. I would take the occasional beat, go from politics to covering auto, because I was in Detroit, and it was a popular beat. I hated auto. The idea of selling something was just not what I wanted to cover.
So you'd rather make less money doing something you love than more money covering something you can't stand?
There's a price, a reward to it anyway that's immeasurable. And it's a reward that people who are driven by money, I don't think understand or just haven't experienced yet, that it really is a rare thing. I don't want to underestimate the rareness of the opportunity that was bestowed, that I can't say any of it can be replayed, but I would never change a thing.
If you didn't write, what would you do?
I think I'd play music.
Great
If I'm
answer.
showering, I need to listen to music that captures the mood I want to be in.
What music? What would you play?
Angry is going to be Rage
No, I mean,
Against the Machine.
what instrument would you play if you were?
Oh, absolutely. An axe, a rhythm guitar, though I listen to the rhythm instruments. I play bass guitar by ear. It's what I pick out. But everybody air guitar is the lead guitar. I think I would too.
What was the hardest thing you've had to write in your life so far?
Without a doubt, we kept something called the Diabetes Journal, which was life on the transplant wait list. And the hardest part was accepting and writing and admitting what a lousy diabetic I was, that I cheated on my diet all the time. I was a kid. They went and had candy, I ate candy. They chewed sugared bubble gum, I chewed it. And the editor was the greatest piece of advice, and it applies to all kinds of writing, is be honest. That admitting I was a terrible diabetic, immediately I realized later, created a connection with other diabetics who were also lousy. And there were a lot of us. A lot of diabetics have trouble sticking with the diet, always having diet soda. It's a pain in the ass, and I was terrible at it. And I had to admit that the reason I was waiting for organs, it was a bed of my own making. We all lie in beds of our own making.
Yeah.
And I had to be absolutely honest in writing, and it was a breakthrough moment. It showed me I need to be honest in everything I write, or that correct connection never gets made.
So with the transplant then, I know you had the dual transplant, and we talked briefly about what it would have been like if you'd only had one or the other. How hard was that decision to make of going for two instead of one? And secondly, how has receiving the transplant changed your outlook on life, do you think, today?
The amazing thing about a transplant is that not only does your health change, but your mind changes because you have someone else in your body. I mean, imagine this. The organs that keep someone alive are now in you. A year after the transplant happened, the paper kept a journal of what life was like with new organs and the ups and downs. And you're never supposed to meet the donor. You're not supposed to meet the family. You can become too tight. And I got an email from an aunt who said, I think I'm your kidney's aunt. She had picked up the stories in USA Today. The death of the boy coincided with the death of her nephew, and she said, how would you like to talk to Samuel's mother? Samuel was the donor. And I immediately wanted to, and I said, but how would she feel about it? She said, I think that's the one thing that the transplant groups don't get, is that parents desperately want to know that their transplanted children live on. Mm-hmm. It's hard for me not to tear up when I remember this. But after that, I called her on January 11th. January 11th will be the 20th anniversary of the transplant.
Wow.
And as far as I can tell in records, it's the longest successful kidney pancreas transplant in the nation. I don't know. The Mayo Clinic is researching it. But I called her, and she said, what do you like to eat? And I was so thrown off by the question. And I told her I love steak. I'm a big meat eater. She said, what kind of music do you listen to? It was as if we were on a match first date on the phone. And I realized Valerie Flegel wanted to know the life her son was living. She wanted to know, my boy's in California. He's going to movies. He's eating different food. I was so shaken by the interview that when we were done, I walked up to the editors at USA Today because they had hired me from the Post, and I was known as the parachute reporter. You fly into a breaking news event. And I said, I will never cover another disaster for the paper. And it was the last school shooting, the last tornado, the last disaster I ever covered for the paper. Because I was alive because of a grieving mother. Here she is asking me questions about what I like to eat and what movies I see and what songs I listen to. And all she wants is some reassurance that in some way her son is alive. And For 20 years, I was making a living reporting on the grieving of the living. And I was never going to prey on another grieving mother again. I admittedly moved to a much sillier form of journalism. But sometimes silly is what we need.
And it's a lot more fun.
There's a reason movies are an escape.
Yeah.
And I was glad to join in that chase for a new world.
Well, you talk about all this stuff, and it makes me want to ask you, as a journalist, especially with current administration and all the fake news accusations and whatnot, I think it's difficult to know who to trust and what to believe, and with sensational headlines and clickbait and all this stuff we're dealing with. How do you handle that, and how do you feel about it?
I really do feel the internet has ruined journalism, and I'm an old school newspaper guy. But look, Trump is right. So much of the news is fake. Mm-hmm. There are some things you cannot deny he is on to. That the power of television, the power of coming into someone's home. Trump had that advantage for however many years he was on Apprentice. He was in the home of people. Will Smith once told me, I've done 100 songs, but people will always know me by the
Fresh Prince
song, because that's what they listened to when Will Smith came into their home. Well, what's happened with media is that everything has become a barometer. We could measure how many people watched a show. We could measure how many people bought a book. We were able to measure success. Well, now what we're doing with the media is we are measuring what gets clicked on. If you click on a story, even a celebrity or a sports game, it'll have you go through a slideshow. Well, the secret of that slideshow is that they are counting you for 10 counts on that story. Every new image you count. Every one you look at is counted as a new read on the story. Mm-hmm. So suddenly that becomes the most popular story. And it is the whole notion of clickbait that'll come back to bite us, that there will actually be a currency to printing and to vetting. Those are two verbs that have lost all meaning in journalism.
So are you upset or angry at the world of journalism today?
Very much so. Because the rule of thumb used to be better late than never. It is now better never than late. When I tried my hand briefly at trade reporting for the Hollywood Reporter, Variety, you're very competitive. We would get notes if a story would post 11 minutes after our competition. Well, automatically you're rewarding the wrong thing.
Yeah.
You're rewarding to be first, then to be factual. And the moment that becomes the path, it's a path to destruction. And I really believe there'll be a return, that we will find that there's a benefit in the old way, and hopefully draw something real from it.
Where is a favorite place of yours that you have traveled in your life?
I have to say, I loved Australia because it was like as close as we could get to a time machine. Mm-hmm. They speak our language. They have our technology. They simply don't have the bodies. That if you're taking a bus across the continent, the driver has to be prepared for camel and kangaroo to dart in front and be prepared to hit. Well, that's probably pretty similar to what a stagecoach was like, to travel a continent, not know what's on the other end, not what you're going to meet on the way. About now, everything is known with America, and it's pretty tired. Australia still has, whether it's the deadliest animal on earth or the funniest accent you ever heard, or the way that the natives are being treated. It is so similar to the American Indian.
Yeah.
It really is like seeing this is what America was like when we could have formulated something different.
And is that what makes it your favorite place you've been?
It truly does, because the technology is there to make the right call. Australia really is a blank slate of what America could have been. And I'll be so curious what they choose.
If you had a time machine right now, what era would you go back to? And let's say it's a special time machine that you're not going to have the butterfly effect or anything terrible happen. You get to kind of like a Star Trek episode, you're in a bubble and you just get to observe from a distance. Where would you go?
To one of my dad's stories. I would love to know what our country was like when it truly felt a constitutional crisis. I hear so much about how eventually in the Nixon impeachment, the senators of all parties, of all ilks, needed to face, we cannot have that. That is so foreign to my thinking now.
It's happening right now in this country.
Exactly, but we're so polarized. It's more important to have a side than to have a fact. I would love to see what the nation was like when that really posed a big issue. Oh my God, a president's lied. Power is being abused. When those questions weren't being heard in an echo chamber. It's strange, but I actually wonder, even though I was in it, I've forgotten what was life like when we had 3 networks, when we might not have actually had it, but we had a sense of what the news was. Now we have alternative facts. We don't even know what constitutes a story. I can't blame readers for being confused.
Are you a technology person? Do you like toys and...
I think all reporters are. That all of us want the quickest computer, the best camera, even though we can't shoot. We're all told you have to include art with your story. So we always overspend. All reporters love gadgets, even though we can't really work them once we get past 45. We just like to have them so we can say, yeah, I have a Mac. Yeah, I can use Windows. So while we like to claim we're advanced, truly, we are as backward a people as exist in America. I still shoot with my iPhone. You shoot with whatever is right there.
I didn't take my big camera to Australia, by the way.
Is that right?
I just did all iPhone.
That's heresy for somebody who can shoot.
If you were going to give people of the world one general piece of travel advice from your experience in your life, what would it be?
Recognize your wealth.
Ooh.
And that every place you go, almost every place you go, except for the biggest cities, they would sell children to be with you.
Who would sell children to be with you?
I imagine you could go to almost any poor, impoverished, war-stricken nation, and whatever your worst concern is, they would pay every penny they have to have that. Yet they'll be as happy as they can be. I will never forget when my wife came back from Afghanistan, she couldn't get over at how happy everyone was there. And I think part of that appreciation could come if you realize that you are coming from heaven, you are visiting from on high, and you're returning to on high. And as much as you can bring back in terms of a memory, that's great. But if you can recognize your wealth, wherever you are in life, whether you're very healthy, you're wealthy, if you can afford any meal that you want, might be a big credit expense, but you can eventually pay it off. You're wealthy. If you can wear anything you want to stay warm or cool, you're wealthy. If you got on that plane, you're wealthy. And to have that understanding when you're there, that yeah, that skews your objective some, but to realize how lucky you are and how wealthy you are to be there. And I don't mean in terms of money. I just mean in terms of perspective. Well, already that cement is made for exactly where you want to be, which is that etching, that thing you'll come back and remember. I remember you had a trip once with goulash, of all things, that was your wet cement moment.
Portugal, yeah.
Nothing will be clearer to you or clearer in my mind, and that's what made that trip worthwhile, was that memory.
See, and as soon as you said that, I just remembered eating that goulash.
Exactly.
And now I'm not only hungry, but I'm having a very exciting reliving of that moment.
And listeners can't see it, but he's smiling as well. It truly puts you in the place, and that is the purpose of travel, regardless of where you're going.
Do you have a favorite food?
I'm an all-American boy. Nothing beats a bacon cheeseburger for me. And I know in LA that's a capital offense.
Oh, F that, man. I
But
love burgers.
exactly. I admit I'm a caveman, remain that way. I even love fast food.
Me too.
The notion that we can go up to any store, order a burger, and there it is. Imagine what a miracle to more than half the world that is.
I know. And what's funny is that I don't want to shit on Angelinos, but they often give me a lot of crap if they find out that I eat McDonald's. And when one of my friends is like, I cannot believe that you eat McDonald's of all things, I actually that day usually go to McDonald's and eat a burger just to kind of have a quiet fuck you moment.
More power to you.
Yeah. I'm like, look, dude, I grew up on McDonald's in the Midwest. It is a comfort food. And if I'm having a little bit of a rough day or whatever, sometimes some McD's French fries really hit the spot. So,
and there is nothing like a perfectly salted McD. I don't care.
I agree.
What restaurant you go to, whatever the brain signal is that sends off that endorphin, whatever it is.
Sugar, salt, and fat, man. What more could you ask for?
It's the reason we're here.
Do you have a favorite place you've eaten in the entire world? Some meal that stands out?
Barbecue. And I can't find a good one here anymore. I go to Hoggly Woggly's.
I was going to say, did you go to Hoggly Woggly's?
Hoggly Woggly's is my one spot. There used to be one in the Valley, and I once went to a barbecue place in Chicago, and something about a dry rib. Like I said, I am a meat eater. That hamster can testify.
Guinea pig.
Guinea pig.
Double Stuff agrees with you. Best barbecue I ever had was actually at this place called the Blue Ribbon Barbecue in Boston.
Do you know any around here? I don't even know of any. Mr. Cecil's was the place that closed. I don't know if you ever ate there.
I did. It was good.
Yeah.
Is there somewhere in the world, and it could be even in the United States, but is there somewhere you've never been that you'd love to go?
Truly, I want to go to Antarctica.
You're the third person to say that this season. Right? Yeah.
I think part of it is understanding the fleetingness of it and the uncertainty of how much longer it's going to be here. You know, in many ways, the funny thing about travel, like Venice, soon you won't be able to enjoy Venice anymore. They've been talking about how much water has overtaken that place.
Yeah.
And it's really changed my map. I mean, I want to see Alaska now. I want to see an unfettered cold. That what it's really like to be part of a frozen environment. That has become such a foreign image to me. That between the California fires and the footage of glaciers melting, I almost don't see cold America anymore. And I know it exists. But now I really want to see places that are perpetually either covered in ice or faced with the reality of almost a year-long winter. And what that element on Earth must be like, because it is seeming so foreign to me now. And see animals surviving in winter, I think, God, I would love to see that. I would love to see a polar bear. And
from a distance.
Yeah. Yeah. But no, it's that kind of thing that makes you think that portion of Earth is getting rarer and rarer to see.
What's been your most beloved trip that you've ever taken mentally, strictly in your imagination?
It's going to sound like I'm flattering my mother and sister.
Nothing wrong with that.
But just in this past week, I really felt I took the best family trip that I had ever taken in the 54 years of the family. And the only travel that we took was 4 miles from here to go to the Japanese garden in Lake Balboa. And what I realized
really
was
cool
that,
place, by the way.
Oh, it was beautiful.
Still is. It's great. Yeah.
And Mom was so warmed by that, by just doing it, that I realized that in the same way that we were talking about, we are all trying to get to that etchable place in our memory. And that during this trip, I didn't travel to a destination. I traveled to a time. I traveled to When I was in middle school and junior high in Detroit, my mother and sister came here from the deep south where I was born, where they live. But the whole time we were here, it was us as we were as young Michiganders. When Dad was at work and Mom was at home and the kids were under her charge. And somehow that had become recreated again. And the whole time they were here, we weren't in L.A. We were in memory. We were in what we used to be. And we were old enough to be able to say, God, those were great memories, and not be of the mindset that, oh, I'm sad those memories have gone, because that's the form a family union can take. But when a family trip is really going well, you're only going home. And that's where we were.
That is really beautiful. I would like if my family experiences were like that. I think, oh, that's another whole podcast.
Well, and I don't mean to intimate that they always are, but they were right now. And I realized that I was in that travel mindset, that you can be anywhere and you can be holding the wet cement and it could be drawn for you at any time. And for whatever reason, on this trip is when it was drawn. And the week felt like a day, and it was all back to where we once were as young people in Michigan. And we're still there. Even when we talk on the phone, we are saying, what a great trip that was.
Yeah, that's priceless. What's your whoopee? What's your security blanket item that you would take with you whenever you travel? Do you have one?
A recorder. It is something, whether
Digital?
it's
You use a digital recorder now or
a digital and my phone. I actually carry two, but it is an OCD thing. I keep two recorders. You never know when you're going to meet somebody who's going to be a great interview.
Yeah.
For a column, for anything that you're writing. One thing I learned as a reporter, speak into it. Even if you're not recording somebody, just record yourself. What do you see? You will take better notes than you ever will by paper.
I've done that. And then you listen back later on. You're like, oh, that's right. I forgot about that guy that was sitting there with that's really cool.
That's my Linus blanket.
Scott, what's your spirit animal?
You know, I think my spirit animal is a mayfly.
Why is that?
Because some mayflies live 8 hours. I don't know if you know that.
No.
The one thing, I got juvenile diabetes when I was 14. So the one thing you don't count on is anything in the future. The idea of 50 was like me dunking a basketball. It was as far-fetched as an alien. But the beauty of being sick is you are always aware of when it's a good time, of when you're not sick. And that, for instance, I'm now 54. Well, I can remember not thinking I'll get to 54, then I'll get to 50. So all 4 years will be icing, and every year after that will be icing. Well, think of a mayfly. They have 8 hours. If you can't make the most of your life with that, what could you make it with? And to me, nothing is emblematic more of every second being precious than in a mayfly. And knowing that I can't keep up that mindset the way I'd like, I at least can think, well, my spirit animal will. A mayfly will appreciate every second. If I can get even a fraction of that, I'm doing something right.
How long do you think you're going to live?
Now my goal is 60. I've made these very cold judgments, and my financial person says, you're making a big mistake. You're going to live past that.
I agree.
You're going to have money trouble. I pray for that money trouble.
I don't know that you're having money trouble, but I think you're going to live at least until 80.
And each time, like when I hit 55, I will officially celebrate being a senior citizen, being an AARP's definition of a senior citizen. Then when I hit 60, I'll think, well, look at all the people I've outlived. And then when I hit 65, I'll think, God damn, I'm an old man. Who would have bet it?
I hope that we get to celebrate your 60th birthday party in Antarctica.
Bring the mic. We definitely will.
The last thing I'd like to do with every guest is a little game that I call 200 Philosophical and Life Questions with Moonbird. And I have collected from friends, family, and the internet a list of 299 really excellent philosophical life questions.
Oh, for Christ's sake.
Some are good, some are funny, some are serious. I mean, they're all good. Some are poignant, some are not. Pick two numbers from 1 to 299. You get to randomly have these sprung upon you.
247 and 111.
Ooh, 247 and 111. Scrolling down here. Okay. 247. What have you always wanted to try but haven't found the courage to do?
Eat broccoli. I cannot teach myself. I have what's called the Larry test. I used to have this yellow lab named Larry. If I dropped it on the floor and he ate it, it was edible. I dropped broccoli once. He would not eat it. And I refused to put it anywhere near my mouth.
But you mean tell me, in 54 years, you've never had broccoli?
Nor have I had a cup of coffee.
I've never had a cup of coffee, actually.
Is that right?
I have had coffee ice cream, and I have had an iced blended, which had like a coffee extract in it, but I've never sat down and drank a cup of coffee.
It smells great.
It does. I'm a tea drinker, yeah.
When the broccoli failed the Larry test, it failed my test too.
Wow. I think I might have to see if we can get you. Broccoli's delicious, man.
I know I should eat it. Maybe one day I'll find the courage.
Okay, so 111. Ooh, it's a good one. If past lives are real, what was yours?
Mine was probably playing bass for a Go Nowhere band.
But you guys were awesome, I'll bet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That I would know we were great. They would know we were great. When we got up there, we know they were great. We were great. And that was all the reward we got, was the knowledge that we could create something with music. That is a form of language I've always wished I had. And the idea of someone going to a guitar, even if they've never had anything recorded, and being able to play something like that, that's what I would be.
That's awesome. Scott, thank you so much for coming here and being part of this.
I can't tell you how fun this was, Daniel.
Yeah, I really appreciate you. And best of luck. I hope we get to do this again when you're 80.
Bring it to Antarctica.
Have a great day.
You too.
If you'd like some more Moonbird in your life, and hey, who wouldn't? Head on over to memoriesofamoonbird.com or visit me on social media @memoriesofamoonbird.